Kushtaka, the Otter Man of Alaska. The whispering wilds of Alaska. The wind howled through the ancient spruce trees, carrying with it the scent of snow and secrets. Alaska, the last frontier, was a land of untamed wilderness, where the line between the natural and the supernatural blurred with every step into the shadowy forest. Here in the heart of the Tlingit territory, legends were not just stories told around the fire. They were warnings, woven into the very fabric of survival. It was late autumn, and the days had grown short. The sun barely skimmed the horizon before retreating, leaving the land cloaked in a blue twilight that seemed to last forever. The rivers, once roaring with the rush of salmon, now moved sluggishly beneath a thin crust of ice. The villages huddled close to the water's edge, their windows glowing with the promise of warmth and safety. But beyond the reach of firelight, the world belonged to other things. My name is Daniel, and I was not born in Alaska. I came here chasing adventure, drawn by the promise of gold and the thrill of the unknown. I thought I was prepared for anything, the cold, the hunger, the loneliness. But nothing could have prepared me for what I would encounter in the wilds near Sitka, on a night when the wind seemed to speak my name. A warning from the elders before. I set out on my journey. The elders of the village gathered around me. Their faces were lined with the wisdom of generations, their eyes sharp and wary. "Do not go alone near the water after dark," warned old Miska, her voice barely more than a whisper. "There are things in these woods that are not meant for outsiders." I laughed, trying to hide my unease. "Bears? Wolves? I've seen worse." She shook her head. "Not bears, not wolves. Kushtaka." The word hung in the air, heavy and unfamiliar. I had heard it before, in the stories told by the children, but I had dismissed it as superstition. A shapeshifter, half man, half otter, who lured travelers to their doom. It sounded like a tale to keep kids from wandering too far. But the way the elders looked at me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. "Carry something made of copper or steel," Miska insisted, pressing a small coin into my palm. "And if you hear a voice calling your name, do not answer." I nodded, pocketing the coin, and promised to be careful. But in my heart, I was already dismissing their fears. I was a man of reason, a man of the modern world. What could a story possibly do to me? Into the forest. The next morning I set out before dawn, my pack heavy with supplies. The forest was silent, save for the crunch of my boots on the frost-hardened ground. I followed the river, its surface shimmering with the first light of day. The air was crisp and my breath hung in clouds before me. As I walked, I thought about the stories I had heard. The Kushtaka, they said, could mimic the voices of loved ones, luring people away from safety. Some believed they were evil, transforming lost souls into more of their kind. Others claimed they were protectors, saving people from drowning by turning them into otters. The truth, I supposed, was somewhere in between. I stopped to rest by the water's edge, watching the ice drift by. The silence was comforting, and I soon drifted into a light sleep, lulled by the gentle murmur of the river. The first Sengnai awoke to the sound of laughter. Soft, distant, and unmistakably human. I sat up, heart pounding. The forest was empty, the only movement the slow swirl of mist rising from the river. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing through the trees. No answer, just the wind, rustling the branches overhead. I shook off the unease and continued on my way, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Every so often, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, or the faint sound of someone calling my name. I told myself it was just my imagination, the product of too many ghost stories and too little sleep. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, I realized I was lost. Nightfall, and the voice. The forest changed. At night, the shadows grew longer, the silence deeper. I tried to retrace my steps, but every tree looked the same, every path led me further from the river. That's when I heard it. A voice, clear and familiar, calling my name. Daniel. It was my sister's voice, soft and pleading. But she was thousands of miles away, safe in the warmth of her home. Daniel, help me. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. But the voice was so real, so desperate. Against my better judgment, I followed the sound, deeper into the woods. The trees closed in around me, their branches clawing at my clothes. The air grew colder, and the darkness pressed in from all sides. The voice grew louder, more insistent. Daniel, please. I stumbled into a clearing, breathless and terrified. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale light over the snow. In the center of the clearing stood a figure, tall, hunched, its body covered in thick, matted fur. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, and its mouth twisted into a grin that was almost human. Kushtaka, I whispered, the word tasting like ice on my tongue. The creature's eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I could not move. My breath caught in my throat as it took a step forward, its massive, webbed feet sinking into the snow with a soft crunch. The air was thick with the scent of wet fur and something older, something wild and untamed. I wanted to run, to scream, but my legs would not obey. The Kushtaka tilted its head, studying me with a strange, almost curious expression. Then, in a voice that was both my sister's and not, it spoke. Daniel. Come closer. The sound sent a jolt of terror through me. I clutched the copper coin in my pocket, feeling its cold edge bite into my palm. The elder's warning echoed in my mind. Do not answer. Do not follow. But the voice was so familiar, so heartbreakingly real. I took a hesitant step forward, unable to resist the pull. The Kushtaka's grin widened, revealing sharp, gleaming teeth. It reached out a clawed hand, its fingers long and webbed, tipped with black, curved nails. I stumbled back, finally breaking free from its gaze. No! I shouted, my voice cracking with fear. You're not real! The creature let out a guttural growl, the sound vibrating through the clearing. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches creaking in the wind. The moonlight flickered, casting shifting shadows across the snow. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, branches whipping at my face. The Kushtaka's footsteps thundered behind me, impossibly fast and heavy. I could hear it calling my name, the voice shifting from my sister's to my mother's, to voices I hadn't heard in years. Daniel, help me. Daniel, come back. I pressed the coin to my chest, praying it would protect me. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't dare stop. The forest seemed endless, a maze of darkness and fear. Suddenly, I burst out onto the riverbank. The water glimmered in the moonlight, a ribbon of silver cutting through the night. I could see the village lights in the distance, a faint promise of safety. But the Kushtaka was still behind me, its breath hot on my neck. I could feel its claws reaching for me, its voice a constant, maddening whisper in my ear. Desperate, I hurled the copper coin into the air, shouting a prayer to the spirits of the land. The coin flashed in the moonlight, spinning end over end, before landing in the river with a soft plunk. The Kushtaka let out a furious screech, recoiling as if struck. Its form shimmered, shifting between man and otter, its eyes blazing with rage. For a moment it seemed to dissolve into mist, its body losing shape and substance. I stumbled backward, falling to my knees on the frozen ground. The creature howled, the sound echoing through the trees before vanishing into the darkness. I lay there gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The forest was silent once more, the only sound the gentle rush of the river. Slowly, I got to my feet and made my way back to the village, never once looking back. The elders were waiting for me, their faces grave but relieved. "You saw it, didn't you?" Miska asked, her voice soft. I nodded, unable to speak. She pressed another coin into my hand, her eyes filled with sorrow and understanding. "Remember, Daniel," she said, "the Kushtaka is always watching. Never forget the stories." That night, as I lay in my bed, I listened to the wind howling outside, carrying with it the echoes of voices long gone. I knew I would never forget what I had seen, or the lesson I had learned in the heart of the Alaskan wilds, but sometimes late at night I still hear my name whispered on the wind. And I wonder if the Kushtaka is waiting for me, just beyond the edge of the firelight. Days passed, but the memory of that night clung to me like a second skin. I tried to return to my old routines, chopping wood, fishing by the river, sharing stories with the villagers, but nothing felt the same. Every shadow seemed to hide, a pair of glowing eyes, every gust of wind carried a voice I could almost recognize. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall, I found myself drawn back to the riverbank. The water was nearly frozen, the surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish or the distant call of a loon. I sat on a fallen log, turning the new copper coin over and over in my hand. A young boy from the village, Luca, approached, quietly. He was no more than 10, but his eyes held the seriousness of someone much older. "You saw the Kushtaka, didn't you?" he asked, sitting beside me. I hesitated, then nodded. I did. Luca shivered, pulling his coat tighter. "My grandfather says they come for people who are lost or lonely. He says they can be good or bad, depending on what you need." I thought about that, about the way the Kushtaka had called to me, using the voices of those I loved. Was it trying to help me or to claim me? "Do you believe the stories?" I asked. Luca nodded solemnly. "I do. My uncle disappeared last winter. He went out on the ice and never came back. Some people say he drowned, but my grandfather says the Kushtaka took him. Maybe to save him from freezing, maybe to keep him company." We sat in silence, watching the snow fall. I wondered how many others had vanished into the wilds, their fates unknown, their names whispered only in legend. That night I dreamed of the Kushtaka. In my dream I was walking through the forest, the trees bending low to let me pass. The air was thick with mist and the ground was soft beneath my feet. I heard laughter, my own echoing back at me from the darkness. I followed the sound, deeper and deeper into the woods until I came to a clearing. There, standing in the moonlight, was the Kushtaka. But this time it did not look menacing. Its eyes were sad, its mouth set in a gentle smile. "Why do you fear me?" it asked, its voice a chorus of all the people I had ever loved. I tried to answer, but no words came. The creature reached out, not to grab me, but to offer its hand. I hesitated, then took it. The world spun, and suddenly I was underwater, swimming through icy currents, my body changing, adapting. I felt the freedom of the river, the strength of the otter, the peace of belonging. When I awoke, my heart was pounding, but I was not afraid. I felt different, as if a part of me had stayed behind in that dream, forever linked to the spirit of the land. The winter deepened, and the village grew quiet. People stayed indoors, huddled around their fires, telling stories to keep the darkness at bay. But I found myself venturing out more often, drawn to the wild places where the boundary between worlds was thin. One night, as the aurora danced across the sky, I heard the voice again. This time, it was not pleading or desperate. It was calm, inviting. "Daniel, come see." I followed the sound to the edge of the river, where the ice glowed green and blue in the shifting light. There, standing on the bank, was the kushtaka. It watched me with those ancient, knowing eyes, and I felt no fear. "What do you want from me?" I asked. The creature tilted its head. "To show you what lies beyond fear. To teach you the ways of the wild." I stepped forward, the cold forgotten, the night alive with possibility. For the first time I understood that the kushtaka was not just a monster or a warning. It was a guardian, a guide for those willing to listen. And so under the shimmering lights of the northern sky I walked with the kushtaka, leaving behind the world I had known, and entering a new one, where legend and reality were one and the same. The days that followed were unlike any I had ever known. The kushtaka became my silent companion, always present at the edge of my vision, sometimes a shadow slipping between the trees, sometimes a ripple on the water. I learned to move quietly through the forest, to read the signs left by animals, to sense the subtle changes in the wind that foretold a coming storm. The villagers noticed the change in me. I was no longer the outsider, the man who laughed at their stories. I listened now, truly listened, to the wisdom in their words. I helped repair nets, shared in the hunt, and sat by the fire as the elders spoke of the old ways. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky blazed with color, Miska approached me. She studied me for a long moment, her eyes searching. "You have seen much," she said quietly, "but there is more to learn." I nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The kushtaka had shown me the wildness of the land, but there were still mysteries I did not understand. That night I returned to the riverbank, the place where it had all begun. The air was thick with mist, the water dark and silent. I knelt by the edge, watching my reflection ripple and fade. Suddenly, the kushtaka appeared beside me, its form shifting and uncertain. It looked at me with those deep, ancient eyes, and I felt a surge of emotion, fear, awe, gratitude. "Why did you choose me?" I asked, my voice barely more than a whisper. The creature's answer was a feeling, not words, a sense of kinship, of shared loneliness, of the need to belong. I realized then that the kushtaka was not just a monster or a myth. It was a part of this land, a guardian of its secrets, a bridge between worlds. I reached out, and for a moment our hands touched. The world spun, and I saw visions of otters swimming through icy rivers, of hunters lost in the snow, of children laughing by the fire. I saw the past and the future, the living and the dead, all woven together in a tapestry of light and shadow. When the vision faded, I was alone once more. But I was not afraid. I knew now that I was a part of this place, bound to it by ties stronger than blood. The winter passed and spring came at last. The river thawed, the trees budded, and the village came alive with new hope. I stayed in Alaska, building a life among the people who had welcomed me as one of their own. But I never forgot the kushtaka, or the lessons it had taught me. Sometimes on quiet nights, I would walk by the river and listen for the sound of laughter in the mist. And when I heard it, I would smile, knowing that I was never truly alone. For in Alaska, the wild is never far away, and the line between legend and reality is as thin as the ice on the river in spring. Years later, I would sometimes be asked by travelers or new arrivals to the village about the stories of the Kushtaka. Some would laugh, as I once did, dismissing the tales as mere superstition. Others would listen, their eyes wide with wonder or fear. I always told them the truth as I knew it. Not just the facts, but the feeling, the sense of awe and respect that the land demanded. One summer, a group of hikers went missing near the old logging trails. The search parties combed the woods for days, but found only footprints leading to the river and then nothing. The villagers whispered that the Kushtaka had taken them, either to save them from a worse fate or to claim them for its own. I joined the search, my heart heavy with memories. As I walked the familiar paths, I felt the presence of the Kushtaka, watching from the shadows. I called out to it, not in fear but in hope. That night I dreamed of the missing hikers, safe and warm, swimming with otters beneath the ice. When I awoke, I left a copper coin by the river, a gift for the guardian of the wild. The seasons turned, and life went on. I grew older, my hair streaked with gray, my hands rough from years of work. But the bond I shared with the land and with the Kushtaka never faded. I became a storyteller, passing on the legends to the next generation, teaching them to respect the mysteries of the world around them. Sometimes on long winter nights, I would sit by the fire with Luca, now a young man, and we would remember the old days. He had his own stories now, his own encounters with the strange and the unknown. Together we kept the memory of the Kushtaka alive, not as a monster to be feared, but as a symbol of the wildness and wonder of Alaska. And so, the legend endures. The Kushtaka still roams the forests and rivers, its laughter echoing through the trees, its eyes shining in the darkness. It is a reminder that there are things in this world that cannot be explained, that the line between myth and reality is never as clear as we would like to believe. If you ever find yourself alone in the wilds of Alaska, listen carefully to the wind. You may hear your name whispered in the night or catch a glimpse of a shadow moving just beyond the edge of the firelight. If you do, remember the stories. Carry a coin of copper or steel, and never forget that you are a guest in a land where legends still walk. For in Alaska, the wild is alive, and so are its stories. Epilogue. The Last Whisper. Many years have passed since that fateful winter, but the memory of the Kushtaka remains as vivid as the northern lights that dance across the Alaskan sky. I have become an old man, my days spent in quiet reflection, my nights filled with dreams of the wild. The village has changed. New houses, new faces, the old ways slowly fading into memory. But some things endure. On the anniversary of my first encounter, I walked to the riverbank, cane in hand, breath misting in the cold air. The water is as dark and mysterious as ever, the trees standing silent guard. I kneel, as I have every year, and place a copper coin on a flat stone by the water's edge. "Thank you," I whisper, my voice trembling with age and emotion, "for the lessons, for the protection, for the stories." The wind stirs, carrying with it a faint, familiar laughter. I close my eyes and listen, letting the sound wash over me. In that moment I am young again, running through the forest, heart pounding with fear and wonder. I rise slowly, my joints protesting, and turn to leave. As I do, I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a flash of fur, a ripple on the water, a pair of eyes shining in the dusk. I smile, knowing that the Kushtaka is still there, watching, waiting, guarding the boundary between worlds. Back in the village, I gather. the children around the fire and tell them the story once more. Their faces glow with excitement and fear, their imaginations alight with visions of shapeshifters and spirits. I teach them the old songs, the prayers for safe passage, the importance of respect, for the land, for the creatures, for the stories themselves. As the fire burns low and the children drift off to sleep, I sit alone, staring into the embers. I think of all the people who have come and gone, all the lives touched by the wildness of Alaska. I think of the Kushtaka and of the gift it gave me, the gift of belonging, of understanding, of seeing the world with new eyes. And I know that when my time comes, when I take my final journey into the unknown, I will not be afraid, for I have walked with legends, and I have learned their secrets. I have become a part of the story, and the story will live on. So if you ever find yourself in Alaska, alone and uncertain, remember this: the wild is alive, and it is watching. Respect the land, honor the stories, and carry a coin of copper or steel. And if you hear your name whispered on the wind, do not be afraid, for you are never truly alone, not in a land where legends walk and where the spirit of the Kushtaka endures. The end. The Alaska Triangle. Shadows in the white void, the disappearance. Alaska is a land of silence and secrets. The wind here does not simply blow. It howls. It whispers. It carries the voices of those who have vanished into the endless white. The forests are ancient, the mountains jagged and cold, and the sky stretches so wide that it seems to swallow all hope. But there is a place, marked only by the trembling of compasses and the hush of frightened voices, where the world itself seems to come undone. The Alaska Triangle. My name is Sarah Mitchell. I grew up in Anchorage, the daughter of a bush pilot and a nurse. My brother Tom and I were inseparable, raised on stories of the wild, taught to respect the land and its dangers. We learned to read the sky, to trust our instincts, to never take the wilderness for granted. But nothing could prepare us for the day the Triangle took Tom away. It was late November, the sun barely rising above the horizon before sinking again into a twilight that lasted for days. Tom was flying a supply run to a remote village near Barrow, a route he'd flown 100 times. The weather was clear, the radio checks routine. I was at the airfield helping load the last crates when he squeezed my shoulder and grinned. "Back by dinner, sis. Save me some coffee." Those were the last words I ever heard him say. The first sign of trouble came an hour later. The radio crackled with static, Tom's voice thin and distant. "Sarah, instruments are acting up. Compass spinning. Visibility dropping. The transmission cut out." I called back, heart pounding, but there was only silence. The sky outside had darkened, clouds rolling in from the north swallowing the sun. I tried to tell myself it was just a glitch, that Tom would land soon, laughing at my worry. But as the hours passed, dread settled over me like a second skin. The search began at dawn. Planes, helicopters, snowmobiles. Everyone who could help joined in. We scoured the route, calling his name into the wind, searching for any sign. A scrap of metal, a trail in the snow, a flicker of hope. There was nothing. No wreckage, no signal, no footprints. It was as if Tom and his plane had been erased from the world. Days turned into weeks. The search was called off, but I refused to give up. I pored over maps, weather reports, old stories of the Triangle. I found patterns, other disappearances, other voices lost to the static. Some said it was the magnetic fields, others blamed the weather. A few whispered of things older and stranger than science could explain. At night I dreamed of Tom calling for help, his voice echoing through endless corridors of ice and shadow. I woke with his name on my lips, the taste of fear sharp and cold. One evening, as the aurora flickered green and blue across the sky, I found a notebook in Tom's room. It was filled with sketches, strange symbols, maps of the triangle, notes about lights in the sky and stories from old pilots. At the bottom of one page he had written, "If I disappear, don't look for me. The light finds you." I didn't understand, but I couldn't let go. I had to know what happened. I had to bring him home, or at least bring back the truth. So I made a decision. I would fly the same route, follow Tom's path into the heart of the triangle. I packed my gear, checked my plane, and left a note for my mother. "I have to try," I wrote. "I'll come back." The morning I left, the world was silent. The snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, muffling the sound of my footsteps. I climbed into the cockpit, Tom's notebook in my lap, and started the engine. The propeller spun, the plane shuddered, and I lifted off into the gray sky, heart pounding, with fear and hope. As I crossed into the triangle, the world changed. The clouds thickened, swirling in impossible patterns. The compass spun. The radio hissed with static. I gripped the controls, eyes fixed on the horizon, but the land below was lost in a sea of white. Then, just as Tom had described, the instruments died. The world outside the window was a void. No sky, no ground, only endless shifting snow. I called for help, but my voice vanished into the static. I was alone, suspended in a place where time and distance meant nothing. And then I saw it. A flash of light, a shape moving through the storm, a shadow that was not a shadow at all. My heart froze. I reached for Tom's notebook, searching for answers, for comfort, for anything that could explain what was happening. But the only thing I found was fear, lost in the white maze. The silence inside the cockpit was suffocating. I pressed my forehead to the cold glass, searching for any landmark, any break in the endless white. But the world outside was a swirling void, a blizzard that seemed to have no source and no end. My hands trembled on the yoke. I tried to remember my training. Trust your instruments, keep calm, fly by feel if you must. But my instruments were dead, and the only thing I could feel was the slow, creeping terror that I was no longer in the world I knew. I thought of Tom, of his last words, of the warning in his notebook. The light finds you. What light? What did he see before he vanished? I scanned the storm, heart hammering, and for a moment I thought I saw a flicker, a pale blue glow far off in the snow. I blinked, and it was gone. The radio crackled, a burst of static that made me jump. Then, faint and broken, a voice. "Sarah, help me." My blood ran cold. It was Tom's voice, warped by distance and fear. I grabbed the mic, shouting into the void. "Tom, where are you? I'm here. I'm coming." No answer. Only the wind, howling like a living thing. I fought to keep the plane level, but the storm battered me from all sides. The wings shuddered, the engine coughed. I was losing altitude, drifting lower and lower into the white. I tried to climb, but the controls were sluggish, unresponsive. It was as if the air itself had thickened, become a wall I could not break through. Then out of nowhere the ground appeared, a frozen river, winding through a forest of black skeletal trees. I had no choice. I aimed for the river, praying for a miracle. The landing was rough, the plane skidding across the ice, spinning, finally coming to rest with a jolt that rattled my bones. For a long moment, I sat in the cockpit, heart pounding, breath fogging the glass. The world was silent again, the storm gone as suddenly as it had come. I checked myself for injuries, bruised, shaken, but alive. I grabbed my pack, Tom's notebook, and stepped out into the cold. The forest was wrong. The trees were too tall. Their branches twisted into impossible shapes. The snow was untouched, but I felt eyes on me, a presence lurking just beyond sight. I called Tom's name, my voice swallowed by the silence. I followed the river, hoping it would lead me to safety, or at least to answers. The sky above was a flat, colorless gray, the sun a pale smudge behind the clouds. Time lost all meaning. I walked for hours, maybe days, the cold gnawing at my bones, my mind drifting in and out of memory and dream. Sometimes I saw lights in the trees, blue, green, flickering like will-o'-the-wisps. Sometimes I heard footsteps behind me, soft and deliberate, but when I turned there was nothing. Once I found a footprint in the snow, too large to be human, the edges already filling with ice. At night I built a fire and huddled close, clutching Tom's notebook. The pages seemed to shift in the firelight, the symbols moving, rearranging themselves into patterns I almost understood. I dreamed of Tom, of his face pale and frightened, reaching for me through a wall of glass. I woke with a scream, the echo fading into the dark. The next morning, I found a trail, broken branches, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. Hope flared in my chest. I followed the signs deeper into the forest until I reached a clearing. In the center stood a figure, back turned, motionless in the snow. "Tom?" I whispered, voice trembling. The figure turned. It was not Tom. Its face was a blur, shifting and changing, eyes black as the void. It opened its mouth and my brother's voice came out, "Sarah, help me." I stumbled back, heart racing, the world spinning. The figure melted into the trees, leaving only footprints that faded as I watched. I fell to my knees, sobbing, the weight of fear and grief crushing me, but I could not give up. I wiped my tears, stood, and pressed on, deeper into the maze of white and shadow, the notebook clutched tight in my frozen hands. The echoes in the eyes, the forest closed in around me, the trees crowding closer, their branches arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast. The snow muffled every sound, but I could feel the world listening, waiting. My breath came in ragged gasps, each step heavier than the last. I tried to mark my path, breaking twigs, leaving scraps of cloth, but when I looked back, the trail was gone, swallowed by the shifting snow. I began to lose track of time. Hunger gnawed at me, thirst burned my throat, but worse was the loneliness, the sense that I was the last person left in the world. Sometimes I heard voices, Tom's, my mother's, even my own, calling from somewhere deep in the trees. Sometimes I saw shapes moving at the edge of vision, tall, thin figures with eyes that glowed in the twilight, watching, always watching. One night as I huddled by my fire, the air grew thick and heavy. The flames flickered blue, casting strange shadows on the snow. I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching closer. I gripped a stick, heart pounding, and waited. A figure stepped into the light. It was a woman, her face pale and hollow, her eyes wide with terror. She wore a pilot's jacket, tattered and stained, her hair matted with ice. She stared at me, lips trembling. "Help me," she whispered. "I can't find the way out." I reached for her, but my hand passed through empty air. She faded, dissolving into mist, her voice lingering. "Don't trust the lights. Don't follow the voices." I sat awake the rest of the night, haunted by her warning. When dawn came, I found new tracks in the snow, bare feet, leading away from my camp. I followed them, desperate for any sign of life, but they ended at the edge of a frozen lake. The ice was clear as glass, and beneath it I saw faces, dozens of them staring up at me, mouths open in silent screams. I stumbled back, heart racing, and ran until my legs gave out. I collapsed in the snow, sobbing, the cold seeping into my bones. I wanted to give up, to let the white take me, but Tom's voice echoed in my mind. Don't stop. Keep moving. I forced myself to stand, to keep walking. The forest thinned, the trees giving way to a wide, open plain. In the distance, I saw a light, warm, golden, flickering like a beacon. Hope surged in my chest. I ran, stumbling, falling, crawling toward the light. As I drew closer, I saw a cabin, smoke rising from the chimney, windows glowing with promise. I pounded on the door, shouting for help. The door swung open, and Tom stood there, alive, whole, smiling. "Sarah," he said, voice gentle. "You found me." I rushed into his arms, sobbing with relief. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and wood smoke. Tom sat me by the fire, wrapped me in a blanket, and pressed a mug into my hands. But as I drank, I noticed things that didn't fit. The clock on the wall spun backward, the shadows moved against the light, and Tom's eyes were too bright, too wide. I set the mug down, heart pounding. "Tom," I whispered, "where are we?" He smiled, but it was not his smile. The world shimmered, the walls of the cabin dissolving into mist. I was alone again, the fire gone, the cold pressing in from all sides. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the white. The only answer was the echo of my own voice, bouncing back at me from the endless void. The hunters in the mist eye wandered the plain, the memory of warmth fading with every step. The light was gone, the sky a flat, oppressive gray. The snow fell in thick, silent sheets, erasing my footprints as soon as I made them. I called Tom's name, my voice hoarse, but the only reply was the wind, twisting my words into something unrecognizable. The world began to unravel. Sometimes I would walk for hours and find myself back where I started. Sometimes the sun would rise and set in the space of a heartbeat. I saw things that could not be. Trees growing upside down, rivers flowing with black water, shadows that moved against the light. At night, the watchers came. Tall, thin figures, their faces hidden by hoods of shadow, their eyes burning with cold fire. They circled my camp, never coming close, but always there, always watching. I felt their hunger, their curiosity, their ancient, inhuman patience. One night I woke to find one standing at the edge of the firelight. It raised a hand, beckoning. Against every instinct I followed, drawn by a force I could not resist. The watcher led me to a circle of stones, each carved with the same symbols, from Tom's notebook. In the center, a pool of water shimmered with blue light. The watcher spoke, its voice a chorus of whispers. "You are lost. You are found. Choose." I looked into the pool and saw visions. Tom, wandering the snow, calling my name. The faces, beneath the ice, reaching for me. The cabin, the fire, the false hope. I saw myself, older, colder, my eyes empty, my voice lost to the wind. I fell to my knees, sobbing. I just want to go home. The watcher touched my forehead and the world exploded in light. I saw the triangle from above, a web of energy, a place where worlds touched, where the lost became the hunters, and the hunters became the lost. I saw the watchers, ancient and eternal, feeding on fear, on hope, on the stories of those who vanished. When the vision faded, I was alone again, the pool gone, the stones buried in snow. The watchers circled, closer now, their eyes burning with hunger. I ran, stumbling through the white, the world spinning, the sky closing in. I lost all sense of time. Days, weeks, maybe years passed. My memories faded, replaced by dreams of snow and silence. I forgot my name, my purpose, my hope. I became a shadow, a whisper, another lost soul in the endless white. But somewhere deep inside, a spark remained. A memory of Tom, of home, of the world I had left behind. I clung to it, fought, for it refused to let it go, and in that moment the watchers stopped. They watched, waiting as if testing my resolve. I stood trembling and faced them. "I am not yours," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I will not be lost." The watchers faded, their eyes lingering on me, and the world shifted once more. The return and the shadow I awoke on. The riverbank, the snow falling gently, the world silent and still. For a moment I thought it had all been a dream, a nightmare born of grief and cold. But the notebook in my hand was real, the pages filled with symbols that now made a terrible kind of sense. I stumbled through the forest, following the river, the world slowly returning to something like normal. The trees were right again, the sky blue, the sun warm on my face. I found a road, then a village, then people, real people, with voices and faces and warmth. They found me wandering, half frozen, raving about lights and shadows and the triangle. They took me in, fed me, warmed me, listened to my story with wide, frightened eyes. Some believed, most did not, but all of them knew the fear, the sense that something in the wild was watching, waiting. I returned to Anchorage, to my mother, to the life I had left behind. But I was not the same. I saw the watchers in every shadow, heard Tom's voice in every gust of wind. I tried to move on, to forget, but the triangle would not let me go. Sometimes I would wake in the night, heart pounding, certain that I was still lost, that the world outside my window was just another layer of the maze. Sometimes I would see faces in the snow, eyes watching from the darkness, waiting for me to slip, to forget, to be lost again. I never found Tom. His voice still haunts me, calling from the white, begging for help. I know now that some who enter the triangle never truly leave. They become part of the story, part of the hunger, part of the endless shifting snow. And so I write this, a warning to those who would seek the truth, who would chase the light into the heart of the void. The triangle is not a place. It is a hunger, a shadow, a whisper that waits for the lost and the desperate. If you ever find yourself in the wilds of Alaska, and the world begins to unravel, and the snow swallows your footprints, remember this: you are not alone. The watchers are always there, just beyond the edge of sight, waiting for you to forget who you are. And if you hear your name in the wind, do not answer. For the triangle is always hungry, and it never lets go. The Arctic Ocean is a place of silence and shadows, where the ice stretches endlessly toward the horizon and the sky hangs heavy, a dome of colorless gray. The wind here is not merely air in motion. It howls like a living thing, slipping through the rigging of ships and whispering secrets into the ears of those foolish enough to listen. In this place, reality and legend blend together, and the sea guards its mysteries with a jealous will. My name is Jack Thompson, a marine historian who has spent his life chasing the ghosts of the ocean. While others pore over archives in dusty libraries, I have always sought the places themselves, the wreck sites, the forgotten harbors, the silent hulks of ships long abandoned. Among all the tales I've hunted, none has haunted me more than that of the Baychimo, the ghost ship of the Arctic. The Baychimo was no fragile vessel. She was a steel-hulled cargo steamer, built in the early 20th century for the Hudson's Bay Company, designed to endure the crushing pack ice and brutal storms of the northern seas. Yet in 1931, trapped by ice off the coast of Alaska, her crew abandoned her. They believed she would be destroyed, her hull torn apart, her bones left to sink into the frozen abyss. But she did not sink. Instead, she drifted, a phantom silhouette on the white horizon, appearing and vanishing like a mirage. For decades, whalers, explorers, and fishermen reported sightings, each stranger than the last. Some swore she was cursed, others whispered she was not a ship at all but a phantom that had slipped between worlds. The first time I heard of her, I was in Nome, Alaska. An old sailor with a beard like frost and eyes clouded by memory leaned close to me in a dimly lit bar. Outside, the wind roared against the wooden walls, rattling the lamps. "I saw her once," he rasped, his voice like the creak of an old hull. "Out there on the ice, she just sat there waiting. We tried to reach her, but the flows shifted and she was gone. Just gone." His words rooted in me like a seed, one that grew with every year. I collected every account, every newspaper clipping, every sailor's whisper. The Baychimo became my white whale. In 2023, I finally had my chance. A research expedition had assembled, bound for the Arctic to study the retreat of sea ice under climate change. I persuaded the organizers to take me on board as their historian. I told myself it was for research, but the truth was simpler. I hoped to find her. We sailed north from Anchorage. Days bled together in a blur of routines. Ice cores drilled, water samples taken, instruments checked. The cold gnawed into us, like teeth. But my eyes were always on the horizon, searching for steel against snow. Then, one morning, the sun rose weakly over a frozen sea, painting the ice in pallid gold. A silhouette emerged from the mist. At first I thought it a trick of light. But as we drew closer, the shape sharpened into form. A ship, dark against the snow, masts like skeletal fingers clawing at the sky. The Baychimo. We approached slowly, our vessel creaking as it pressed through the groaning ice. The Baychimo's hull loomed above us, blackened by rust yet whole. The deck was empty, the portholes blind and dark. But I felt her watching us. Boarding her was like stepping into another century. The air was stale, cold, thick with the scent of rust and old smoke. Our footsteps echoed down narrow corridors where silence had ruled for nearly 100 years. In the captain's cabin, I discovered a logbook, its pages yellowed but legible. The final entry, November 1931, was scrawled in a hurried hand. "Trapped in ice. Crew abandoning ship. God help us." The words prickled my skin. The ink was faded, but the desperation was still alive. Deeper we went. The hold still contained crates of furs, untouched, preserved by cold. In the engine room, machinery gleamed faintly in the half-light, as if polished by unseen hands. And then, something else. A presence, a weight pressing down on us, watching. For an instant I glimpsed movement. A figure in the shadows, eyes glowing faintly red like embers. But when I blinked, it was gone. The lights above flickered. The ship groaned with a sound like a dying beast. We fled, stumbling back into the Arctic fog, the Baychimo's silhouette dissolving into the whiteness. That night, aboard our own vessel, I could not sleep. The logbook lay on my bunk, its words etched into my mind. The Baychimo was not just an abandoned steamer. She was something else, a vessel trapped between worlds, a ship that refused to die. I swore I would return, for the sea holds its mysteries close, and the Baychimo whispers them still. The days after we first boarded the Baychimo were restless, thick with an unease no one wished to name aloud. Even those who scoffed at superstition grew quiet whenever her name surfaced. Crew members whispered in corners, glancing at the horizon, as though expecting the phantom steamer to drift back into view. I spent long hours hunched over the logbook I had taken from her captain's cabin. Most entries were mundane: temperatures, ice conditions, daily notes about trade goods. But as the autumn of 1931 deepened, the handwriting began to shift, the sentences shorter, more frantic. October 17th. Ice closing fast. Engines straining. Men nervous. October 21st. Strange lights last night. Green flares across the ice. Not aurora. Men whispering. October 27th. Heard voices on deck. No one there. November 2nd. Shadows moving below decks. Crew refusing to sleep alone. And finally, trapped in ice. Crew abandoning ship. God help us. Each line carried a weight of dread. These weren't just the complaints of sailors weary of cold. They spoke of something else, something that stalked them in the dark. Dr. Emily Carter, the expedition's lead scientist, took interest in my findings. She was a woman of logic, her life devoted to data, ice cores, and climate models. Yet even she couldn't disguise the shiver that crossed her face as she turned the fragile pages. "These lights," she said softly, tapping the entry from October 21st. "I've studied auroras for years. They don't behave like that. This sounds different." "And the voices?" I asked. Emily hesitated. "Sleep deprivation, fear, maybe even carbon monoxide poisoning from the stoves. There are explanations." But her eyes betrayed doubt. That night I dreamed of the Baychimo. She loomed in the fog, her hull streaked with frost, her masts like fingers clawing at the aurora-lit sky. I walked her deck alone, the boards groaning under my boots. From the shadows came whispers, hundreds of voices, layered and broken, calling my name. When I turned, a figure stood at the bow. His face was hollow, eyes burning faintly red. He lifted a hand as though to beckon me. I woke drenched in cold sweat, the whisper still curling in my ears. The next morning Emily found me staring out over the endless white sea. "You didn't sleep," she said, studying my face. "No," I admitted. "She won't leave me alone." "Ships don't haunt people, Jack," she said. Yet the way she hugged her coat tighter told me she wasn't certain. 2 days later, a storm struck without warning. Arctic gales tore at us, snow-blinding, waves hurling chunks of ice against the hull. We struggled through the chaos for hours until, as suddenly as it had begun, the storm fell silent. And there, through veils of fog, she waited. The Baychimo. Her silhouette rose from the mist, black and unbroken, as though the storm had delivered us straight into her grasp. My chest tightened with dread and awe. "We shouldn't—" one of the sailors began, but his voice died as the ship loomed closer. Emily and I exchanged a look. Without words, we knew what must happen. Boarding her the second time felt heavier, as though we crossed an unseen threshold. The air was colder, heavier, as if each breath carried frost into the lungs. Our lamps cast thin circles of light that seemed swallowed by the shadows. We made for the lower decks, tracing corridors that felt narrower than before. In the engine room, something caught Emily's eye, a loose floorboard beneath a workbench. She pried it up with frozen fingers and revealed a journal wrapped in oilcloth. Its pages were brittle, ink faded, but the words remained. The entries chilled me more than the cold. "Saw a man in the corridor. Not one of us. Tall, coat dripping, wet though no water on deck. He vanished when I called." Voices louder now, they know our names. The men want to flee, but the ice won't let us go. They come in dreams and in waking. Faces in the portholes, eyes burning red. The final pages descended into incoherence, scratched symbols, frantic sketches of figures, with hollow faces. Emily traced one of the drawings with her gloved hand. "This isn't hysteria," she whispered. "This is Something else. Before I could reply, a sound rose through the ship. A long groan, deep and resonant, like a living creature shifting in its sleep. The deck beneath our boots trembled. Our lamps flickered, shadows darting along the bulkheads. I turned and, for the briefest heartbeat, saw a figure standing at the far end of the corridor. Tall, dark, its eyes two smoldering embers. Then it stepped backward, melting into the blackness. We fled. Back on our vessel, gasping in the freezing air, I clutched the journal against my chest. The Baychimo faded once more into the fog, leaving only silence behind. The days that followed twisted into unease. The crew avoided me, whispering when they thought I couldn't hear. They blamed me for the curse, for bringing the ghost ship upon us. Emily alone stood by me, though I saw the cracks in her resolve. At night she joined me on deck, staring out over the endless ice. Above us, the aurora writhed in colors of green and violet, strange and restless. "Do you feel it?" I asked quietly. "Yes," she whispered. "Like the air is listening." We fell silent, both hearing it then, the faintest murmur beneath the wind. A whisper, rising and fading, like voices carried on the ice. The journals consumed us. Emily, and I pored over every line, piecing together the crew's final weeks. It was clear they had not only battled ice and cold, something else had stalked them, unseen but relentless. And now, it stalked us. I began to dream the same dream night after night, walking the Baychimo's deck, hearing the whispers, seeing the man with burning eyes. Each time he came closer, each time he raised his hand, beckoning. Emily confessed her dreams matched mine. That chilled me more than anything. It was no coincidence. The Baychimo had touched us, claimed us in some unseen way. One evening, Emily approached me with a theory. "What if she isn't drifting randomly?" she asked. "What if the Baychimo is caught in some kind of temporal current? A loop in time. That would explain why she appears, then vanishes, always whole, never decayed. She isn't just lost, she's trapped." "Trapped where?" I asked. Her eyes glimmered with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Between worlds, between then and now." Her words lodged in me like ice. Between worlds. A ship forever adrift, carrying not only cargo but the restless echoes of her crew. And somehow she had set her course toward us. The further north we pushed, the more the world itself seemed to warp around us. Compass needles twitched, refusing to hold steady. The air carried a brittle stillness, as though the sea held its breath. Even the gulls and seals had vanished. Only the ice remained, groaning like something alive beneath our keel. And always, the Baychimo hovered on the horizon, sometimes a dark shadow through the fog, sometimes nothing but the echo of her horn drifting on the wind. Each sighting frayed the nerves of our men further. They muttered of omens of death following in her wake. Some refused to sleep, staring out at the sea as though waiting for her to rise again. Emily and I alone spoke of her openly, not because we were unafraid, far from it, but because silence seemed to give her greater power. One night the whispers returned, louder this time. I woke to find myself standing on deck, though I had no memory of leaving my cabin. Around me, the sea lay flat as glass, the aurora writhing above in violent streaks of crimson and green. And there she was, the Baychimo, gliding silently alongside us. Her hull loomed just yards away, frost clinging to her iron plates, windows dark but watchful. The whispers grew clearer, not just murmurs now but words, My name, over and over. From her deck, shapes stirred. Dozens of figures in ragged coats, their faces blurred, their eyes glowing faintly red. They stood motionless, gazing across the gulf between our ships. One raised a hand in silent greeting. I stumbled, backward, colliding with Emily. She had followed me, her face pale in the aurora's glow. "Do you see them?" I whispered. "Yes," she breathed. "God help us, I see them." Then, as suddenly as she had come, the Baychimo slipped back into the mist, leaving only silence. The next morning, one of our crew was missing. Anders, a young deckhand. His bunk lay empty, his belongings untouched. The only sign was a trail of wet footprints leading from his cabin to the rail. They ended at the edge of the deck. The men refused to speak his name. They avoided me as though I carried the curse myself. I could not blame them. Emily and I searched for an explanation, but deep down we knew the truth. The Baychimo had taken him. We tried to turn south after that, to leave the ghost ship and her frozen waters behind. But no matter our heading, the fog closed in. Hours stretched into days. The charts became meaningless. Landmarks vanished. It was as though the sea itself had twisted into a labyrinth, designed to keep us circling endlessly. And always, she returned. Sometimes distant, sometimes near enough that I swore I could hear boots echoing across her decks. The journals we had recovered haunted me. The sketches of hollow faces, the frantic pleas. I began to wonder if we too were being written into her story. Just another chapter in her endless cycle of loss. One evening, Emily confronted me with eyes hollow from sleepless nights. "She wants us," she said simply. "Not just to frighten, to claim." "Why us?" I asked. "Because we saw her. Because we listened." Her hands trembled as she clutched the journal to her chest. "I think she can only exist through those who remember her. Each sighting keeps her alive. Each witness feeds her. And now," her voice broke, "now we belong to her." That night the dreams returned stronger than ever. I walked the Baychimo's deck, the whispers roaring around me. The crew of shades stood waiting, their glowing eyes fixed on me. At their center stood the tall man I had seen before, his face shadowed, his hand outstretched. This time I did not wake, not at once. I felt the cold wood beneath my boots, smelled the rust and brine. My fingers brushed the frozen rail. It was real, too real. I forced my eyes shut, willing myself awake. When I opened them again, I was back in my bunk, drenched, in sweat, my nails torn as though I had clawed wood in my sleep, and on the floor lay frost. A scattering of ice crystals glittering in the lantern light. The crew grew restless, mutinous. They demanded we abandon the expedition, even if it meant risking the ice. But it was too late. The sea itself seemed determined to hold us here. Then came the second disappearance. Merrick, the engineer, vanished during his watch. His tools lay scattered near the boiler as though dropped mid-task, and there, scratched into the frost on the bulkhead, was a single word: "Come." Fear turned to madness. The men accused me of bringing the curse upon them, of consorting with ghosts. One lunged with a knife, eyes wild. Emily intervened, her voice cutting through the chaos, but the trust that bound us had shattered. We were no longer a crew. We were prey. That evening, as I stood on deck alone, the Baychimo drifted close once more. She towered beside us, silent, her decks crawling with those same shadowed figures. They lined the rails, their hollow gazes fixed on me. The tall man stepped forward, lifting his hand again. Only this time I heard his voice. "You are already ours." The words vibrated through the air, through my bones. I staggered back, clutching my head as the whispers swelled, and then silence. When I opened my eyes, the Baychimo was gone. But I knew she would return. She always returned. Emily found me hours later, shivering. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, but her own hands shook. "They're not just echoes," she whispered. "They're hunting us." I looked into her eyes and saw the same truth burning there. We were no longer explorers of the Arctic. We were prisoners of the Baychimo, and the sea would not let us go. The Arctic night stretched on without end. Days and nights blurred together in an endless gray twilight, broken only by the flickering aurora that painted the sky with fire. Our ship drifted aimlessly, her crew reduced to a handful of gaunt, broken men. The rest were gone, claimed by the sea or by the Baychimo. I no longer asked which. Emily kept me anchored to reality, though I could see the shadows claiming her too. She spoke less, stared longer into the mist. Sometimes I caught her lips moving as if answering whispers I could not hear. On the 7th night since Marek's disappearance, the fog parted. There she was again, the Baychimo. Closer than ever, her black hull scraping the ice, her decks crawling with figures. They stood shoulder to shoulder, silent, their eyes glowing like embers in the gloom. This time, she did not drift past. She halted beside us, tethered not by rope or anchor but by something unseen. It was as though the sea itself held us together. The tall man stepped forward, more distinct than before. His coat whipped in the frozen wind, though I felt none. His face was pale, scarred by frost, his eyes twin fires. When he spoke, the air itself seemed to vibrate. "The ice has claimed you. The ship has chosen. Cross and you will endure. Refuse, and you will perish." His words echoed in my skull. I staggered back, but Emily stood firm, her face pale but resolute. "What are you?" she demanded. His gaze shifted to her. For the first time, I saw recognition in his eyes, as though he knew her name before she spoke it. "We are the forgotten, bound to the loop. The Baychimo sails forever between worlds, carrying those who will not rest." The crew broke then. 2 men leapt the rail, scrambling across the ice toward the Baychimo as though drawn by invisible chains. They vanished into her shadows, swallowed without a sound. The rest screamed, begged, prayed. Some clutched weapons, but what use is steel against the dead? One by one they collapsed into silence, broken shells of sailors. Only Emily and I remained, standing. She turned to me, eyes blazing with a feverish light. "Jack, maybe this is the only way. Maybe survival means letting go, crossing." "No," I hissed. "That's not survival. That's surrender." Her gaze wavered, torn between reason and the pull of the whispers. If the ship is a loop, if it's caught between times, maybe stepping aboard means freedom from death. Eternal life. Eternal slavery, I countered. Bound to the ice, forever repeating the same nightmare. The tall man extended his hand again. The whispers rose to a roar. I felt them clawing at my mind, pulling, tempting. That night, Emily and I devised a desperate plan. If the Baychimo was a loop, a prison between worlds, perhaps it had an anchor, a tether that bound it. Break the tether, and maybe we could escape. The journals spoke of the engine room, of symbols carved into the bulkheads during the final days. The crew had tried something, whether ritual, prayer, or curse, it was unclear. But it was there the voices grew loudest. So we prepared. Lamps, ropes, what little strength remained. While the others cowered, we crossed the ice toward the Baychimo. Boarding. Her this time was different. She welcomed us. The gangway was lowered, slick with frost, leading straight to her deck. Shadows parted to let us pass, whispering our names as we climbed aboard. The air was heavier, the cold more biting. Every surface shimmered with a thin sheen of ice. The figures watched, but did not move. Their eyes followed us, burning like coals, in the dark. We pressed on deeper into her belly. The engine room lay silent, her great machines entombed in frost. But the walls were carved with frantic marks, symbols overlapping, gouged deep into the iron, circles, spirals, runes I did not recognize, and at the center, scrawled in shaking hand, "Break the circle, end the loop." Emily raised her lamp, her breath ragged. "This is it. The crew tried to bind her. Maybe they failed. Maybe we can finish it." "How?" I asked. She pointed to the largest symbol, etched into the bulkhead like a scar. "Destroy it. Sever the anchor." I lifted a rusted hammer from the floor, its handle frozen to my glove. With every ounce of strength left, I swung. The iron screamed beneath the blow. Again and again. Sparks flew, frost shattered. The whispers rose to a shriek. Shadows surged, flooding the room, clawing at us. Figures pressed in, their faces twisting, their eyes blazing red. The tall man appeared in the doorway, his voice a thunderclap. "You cannot break what has no end." But we did not stop. Emily struck beside me, her own cries drowned by the roar. The bulkhead cracked, the symbol splintering. Light spilled through the fissure, cold, white, blinding. The Baychimo convulsed. The deck pitched, walls groaning as though the ship herself cried out in pain. Figures wailed, their forms unraveling into mist. The tall man staggered, his face contorted in rage and despair. "You will join us," he roared. The fissure widened. Light swallowed him whole. One by one, the shadows dissolved, their whispers fading into silence. And then, everything shattered. Woke on ice. Not aboard the Baychimo, not even on our vessel. Just endless white stretching to the horizon. Beside me, Emily stirred, groaning, her face pale but alive. The Baychimo was gone. No shadow on the horizon, no whisper in the wind. Only silence. We stumbled southward, half mad, half dead, days blurred. When at last we were found by a passing whaler, we had no words, only the journal clutched in Emily's hands. Years have passed since that night. Emily never spoke of it again. She buried herself in science, in data, in anything that kept her mind from drifting north. I tried to do the same, but I cannot forget, because sometimes, when the nights are long and the wind howls across the sea, I hear it still, a whisper, calling my name, and I know the Baychimo sails on, somewhere between worlds waiting